Okay, councillors and colleagues, we are now live on YouTube. So for the purposes of the public, my name is James Edmonds. I'm Democratic Services Assistant Manager here at the County Council, and I'm opening the meeting because in the absence of the Chair, Councillor Scrimshaw, it's necessary for the committee to appoint one of the three vice chairs of the committee, who are Councillor Perry, Councillor Stamborough and Councillor Hakewill, to chair today's meeting. Just before we get on to that, I will advise that we have apologies for non-attendance from Councillor Scrimshaw, the chair, as I say, with Councillor McGee substituting, and also apologies for non-attendance from Councillors Michael Clark and Councillor Cecile Irving Swift. So, having given you the apologies for non-attendance, if I could invite nominations for one of the three vice chairs to take the chair of the committee for this meeting. And I have an indication from Councillor Hakewill.
Thank you, James, for the introduction, and I'd like to nominate Councillor Victoria Perry as chairman for today's meeting.
And is that seconded?
Happy to second that, James.
Okay, and are there any further nominations? I see no indications of that, so in which case Councillor Perry is appointed to chair the current meeting.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any notifications of request to address the meeting, James?
Through you, Chair, yes, we have a notification to address the meeting on item 6, the Children's Trust contract, from Mrs. Jean Lineker. So she will be brought in from the waiting room at the appropriate point and will be invited to address the committee for up to 3 minutes.
Right, I think we'll make that after they've presented the report would probably be appropriate. Yep. Okay, do we have any declarations of interest not disclosed on your register of interest? No? Well, welcome to the meeting. As you know, this meeting was meant to happen on the 28th of October, but because the Children's Trust is imminent on November the 1st, it was agreed to bring it forward to give us the opportunity to scrutinise the financial aspects of the Children's Trust. It's a very specific task we have, which goes in our remit of overview and scrutiny, which is that we're not looking at the broad aspects of the trust. We're not taking any discussion today on what we think about children's trusts and whether they should happen or not, as however tempting it may be. It's not for this arena. So it is a very tight remit to look at the financial aspects, and I will try and keep to that remit as closely as possible. So please don't be offended if I pull you up, or you can be offended. That I will still pull you up. And this doesn't mean you can't ask the other questions. So there are other routes. If there are questions on the more broad aspects of the Children's Trust, then you can write to the portfolio holder and the chief executive, who have delegated authority regarding the arrangements of the trust. I know that I've actually asked questions of the chief executive of the trust and received prompt and timely answers. So it's not a route that's fobbing you off. It is a route that's available. I know Chris, Councillor Stamborough, has also put some of his questions that are broader down that route as well. So it's not that we're not willing to, but the commissioners have made it very clear what the remit of this committee is. When we go into discussions and questions, can you use the blue raised hand function? Because it's very hard for me. Are any of you, I can see all of you actually, but are any of you not using the blue hand function? Have you all got that now? Nod, shake, yeah, thumbs up. Okay, but James, if I do miss somebody, just shout at me, if that's all right. Right, so go to item 5, which is minutes of the overview and scrutiny meeting held on the 30th of September. If we could review the minutes for accuracy and any matters arising from the minutes that anyone wants to raise. I don't see any hands, so I ask the committee to approve the minutes.
Move it.
Minutes approved. Right, so moving on to item 6, which is the Children's Trust, which is our substantive item. There was an updated version of the report which was sent out yesterday. I think we can all appreciate the amount of work that's been going in last minute. So yes, the amendments were last minute, but you know, we are heading towards a very tight deadline. So that was circulated by email on the 20th of October and is available online. So if I could invite the NCC representative to present the report. We have with us and welcome Barry Scarr, who's the Executive Director of Finance. We have Clive Heafy, the Children's Trust Interim Chief Executive, and Sarah Phipps, the Children's Trust Programme Director. So if I could invite you to present the report.
Thank you. Just to a brief introduction, Chair. As you say, I've got my colleagues, Sarah, who's the Programme Manager, and Clive, the Chief Executive of the Trust. Sarah will be doing the introductory slides, and then I'll step in and do the finance slide. Clive is here to give a Trust perspective on any questions that may be answered in terms of the resource envelope as well. But at this point, I'll hand over to Sarah and do the introduction, and I'll step in later with the financial aspects when she's finished doing that.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you, Barry. Hello, everybody. As Barry said, thank you, Chair. I'll spend a few minutes talking through the introduction to the document that was circulated out before I pass to Barry, who will go over the more detail, the financial aspects. So I'll focus on summarising the key issues of a contractual and governance nature. And I shan't go through the details around the background of the Children's Trust in the county, but I will flash to the 5th slide if those of you have got the document in front of you. And these are the key. This is a key schematic which sets out the relationship between the Trust and the council and also the Department of Education. And I think it's a very helpful single diagram that sets out what is quite a complicated relationship between those three parties. In essence, there is a contractual relationship between the council and the trust, and that will novate over to the unitaries on the 1st of April. The council will have the Director of Children's Services, who will manage the intelligent client function, is in here in the middle box, ICF. That is basically the client or the commissioning function. That is the key set of functions that will hold the contract and the trust to account, to monitor the performance management framework, to look at outcomes for children and young people, and monitor performance indicators. That's going to be a key role. That will be in place as of the 1st of November, and that will transfer over as a single function to be shared with the two unitaries as of the 1st of April. On the other side of that, the council will also be providing a number of support services to the Children's Trust, such as HR, finance, ICT, and they're essential to enable the Trust to be a fully functioning organisation and to really help the Trust improve outcomes and to put in place improvement activities that's needed as part of the improvement journey for children's services. And the third element, which is in the top right of the diagram, this one which relates to the statutory direction that the DfE has issued to the council, and as of 1st of November, and as the trust goes live, there will be a governance side agreement in place between the council and the DfE, and that sets out certain matters which the DfE would have consultation and consent rights over, whilst the county is in DfE intervention. There are 4 key schedules, and I've gone on to slide 7 of the papers. There are 4 key schedules that underpin the contractual core terms, and they're set out in a summer specification that sets out the detail of what services to be provided to the council. There's a governance schedule which sets out in some operational detail the key meetings that will be in place and the key reporting and requirements, and that includes reporting into the democratic meetings of the councils as well. A third key schedule sets out the performance framework, how the council will hold the trust to account and keep a close eye on performance and outcomes for children. And the fourth is, particularly pertinent for today, the financial mechanism, which describes the management of the financial arrangements between the trust and the council. On the establishment of the two unitaries, these all will transfer over to the two new councils. The last key things I will go through are on slide 8 and then slide 9, and these are what we're proposing for the governance arrangements to be in place in 2 separate time periods. So on slide 8, this sets out the proposed arrangements for the period between the 1st of November and the 31st of March. So the period of stabilisation, period of transition into the trust. And next slide is post-April. So this here sets out 3 key areas of governance. The section in the middle is about the governance of the contract, proposing an operational group where key officers will get together on a monthly basis to manage the operational issues related to the contract. And there'll be an escalation point to the strategic group, chaired by the council, where you'll have a transition period. We are proposing a monthly frequency, which we are recommending, if approved, to reduce to quarterly post-April. And that's a key group to make sure matters of escalation are taken to that strategic group, and to give a more detailed overview of approvals and strategy. Some work to be done in that transition phase to further develop a support service offer for the Children's Trust. And on the far left side, there's the programme governance, which is the remainder of oversight of the Children's Trust Development Programme that I've been leading on behalf of the council for the last few months. Then on slide 9, it's a similar schematic, but this sets out the proposed arrangements post-April, where there'll be 2 councils in place, clearly, and 2 lead members for children's services, with a clear role of cabinet and full lead member. And then in the middle again, it is the sets out the governance for the contract and how there'll be an interplay between the trust board and the council via the cabinet, and that sets out on that schematic there. I'll pause there and then pass to Barry, who will take us through the next part on the finances.
Thanks, Sarah. If we could move to slide number 11, please. And this slide gives you a view of the different elements of the contract price. So the biggest part of it, and the big blue box, is the current children's budget that sits within the council for those services in scope of the statutory direction. And that budget will be passported over to the trust. There are also additional costs of running a trust in the green box. These are diseconomies of scale, essentially, of splitting the trust out. So we will have a board where previously there wasn't a board. There will be a chief exec, there will be a director of finance, and various other costs as well, which have to go into the contract price because they are the cost of running that organisation. Separately to that, there are the cost of support services, IT, HR, finance, and various other services, which the council will provide to the trust via an SLA or by GB transfer. And they will be included in the contract price as well. And property costs, not just One Angel Square, but all of the properties, operational properties that are in different localities across the Northamptonshire boundary, will be part of that contract price in terms of leases and rents. There's a purple box there, which essentially are contingent sums, which are sums that the council will hold and release on evidence of spend. So, for example, the COVID funding that we've had from central government, if there is a surge in children's need as a result of COVID-19, then that funding will be applied to that. Moving on to the next slide, if we look.
think Barry's muted.
Barry's, I can't see Barry now.
Is that better?
No, Barry's not muted. He's just waiting for the next slide, is he?
Right, the slides have disappeared from my screen. Oh, there we go. Yes, sorry. I think we had a couple of technical hitches. So just to recap, we've got a 5-month budget sum for November through to 31st of March, which is the County Council's budget passported over, and then an equivalent sum for the next 12 months. Now, I'm very much aware that those 12 months are actually the budgets for the West and North unitaries. And I have consulted with, as you would expect, the Section 151 officers of both West and North, because we've had to commit to a 17-month contract price, which obviously covers the LGR boundary, because we have to give the new organisation some sense of certainty over funding. Its accounting year will be from 1st November through to 31st of March 2022. And to get key arrangements in place like insurance and bank accounts, there needs to be that sense of financial certainty, and a 5-month contract price wouldn't have provided that certainty. So we had no other option but to go down the route of a 17-month contract price. So that's why essentially we've got a budget which is in 2 parts, one of which is funded by the County Council, and another 12 months which will be funded by the 2 new unitary councils. As you can see there, the element of the existing budgets gives 55 million from the County Council's budget, and then a full year equivalent next year, taking into account all of the adjustments such as inflation, demographic growth, and committed savings of 132 million from the 21-22 budget. And the next slide, if we move on to that, is the same figures slightly differently, which gives what's called a subjective analysis of the same budget. You'll notice that the number is slightly different from the last slide, and that's because of the directly invoiced income element of that. So what that is, that there's 0.61 million there, which is essentially the difference between the 2 figures, which is NHS costs such as continuing healthcare. If they appear, immediately income is generated by the council, and that's recovered. We haven't grossed the budget up for that because that should be a simple in and out, and that's a minor difference between the 2 figures from the 2 slides. But that gives you an idea of the split of the type of expenditure that's in there, such as staffing, placements, and other care costs, and how that's funded by different income lines. I'm muted again. Can we move on to the next slide, please, James? Yeah. So in terms of the additional costs of establishing a trust, as I said before, there are diseconomies of scale. Previously, where I would have covered the Director of Finance duty, we need another Director of Finance of a substantial limited company and the Chief Executive of a trust, and a Director of Social Care, which would have previously been carried out by that DCS role as well. There's the board and various company admin costs, such as company secretary, which wouldn't previously existed, and servicing that board, and also external audit and VAT and tax advice. The council has also voluntarily provided additional funding for some posts and early help as well, which aren't necessarily part of the cost of running a trust, but we felt need to be bolstered. And in total, those costs come to 0.9 million or £900,000 on top of what we've already got within the existing children's budget. Can we move on to the next slide, James? The next costs are our estimates, and these will be clarified and done at more granular level during the transition period that Sarah referred to before. So in the 5 months from November to March next year, we will be looking at usage on support services for stuff like ICT support, payment of invoices, invoice debtors, and other transactional lines as well, just to give a true cost of those services. Clearly, it's a complex environment because we are repatriating and relocating the LGSS at the same time. So we felt that there was a need to do a proof of concept and sort of wring out a bit more accuracy in those services during that 5-month period and establish those SLAs on a more granular basis. Property as well, for the 5-month transitional period, rather than grant leases, we're doing a license to occupy. And then those leases at market rent or pass-through rent will be developed for the end of the transitional period and will become live on the 1st of April. And there are other things that are within that notional forecast element as well, specifically insurance. At the moment, we have a single insurance policy for the county council and 7 different insurance policies in districts and boroughs as well, covering insurance arrangements. On the 1st of April, they will morph into 3 different insurance policies, 2 for each unitary and 1 for the Children's Trust. So we need to go through a tendering and a market testing and a tendering exercise for those insurance policies. And until that, we can't put a 100% completely accurate figure on insurance. So it may cost a little bit more, it may cost the same, it could possibly cost a little bit less. We don't know until we amalgamate all those insurances and get a better idea across the piece. But that will be, again, developed between the 1st of November and the 31st of March. Next slide, please, James. The one-off pressures one-off expenditure, which the council has held in the funding before. As you can see, the main part of that is an estimate of COVID funding. And there are other parts of that, such as transformation funded by business rates retention and the flexible use of capital receipts as well, which are in that area. In the main, if the trust provide evidence that money has been spent, then the council will pass out that funding over and it will become part of the trust's operating expenditure. On the next slide, it's more process than numbers, but there are various mechanisms within the financial mechanism for ordering the contract price. So where there has been an unanticipated increase in demand for services, then there is a clause in the finance mechanism that allows the trust to claim for more money on demonstration of that additional demand. And there's also voluntary submission of a business case for service improvement, which a council would consider, and investor save proposals as well. Some of these could be, depending upon the size and the scale of them, considered via a very formal change control mechanism, or whether they're a smaller scale, there is a fast track change control mechanism as well within the financial mechanism. Moving forwards, after the trust has been in formation for a year, there is a contract sum negotiation process that will kick in, and that will form part of the 22-23 budget process for the 2 new councils. So once the transitional period's over and we're into the core year of 21-22, then the strategic group will discuss a proposed contract sum for the immediately following financial year, and we expect that to happen in October. There's a number of factors to be taken into account in setting that contract price, which we've shown on the following page, on the following slide. But it's not limited to those factors, there could be other factors. And once that has done, then we expect that the contract price would be agreed by 15th of January for the feed into the February budget setting cycle of the 2 unitary councils. I think at that point, Chair, I know that's been quite a fast canter through, but I know the slides have been sent out and members have read them. So I don't know if Clive wants to add anything on top of that before we take any questions.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, not a lot really, just to add that from the trust perspective, we clearly work very closely with the council to make sure that we understand the scope of services being transferred. We understand the level of resources, both in terms of people resources and financial resources, and we understand the level of risk that's being transferred across to us as well. And the trust board has had considerable discussions on that level of risk. And we're satisfied that the resources are sufficient to cover the scope that's being transferred. We understand the risks that are being taken, and we accept the financial mechanisms there that do allow us in certain circumstances to come back for further resources. But rest assured, members as well, the trust in pursuit of trying to get the outcome of improving the lives of young people in the county, which is our primary aim, are there to drive up standards and drive down costs. So we're not looking to come back on a routine basis. Our interest is in working with the council and driving down those costs. But the mechanism does allow that where there are circumstances which are outside everybody's control, really, that we can flex that contract. It allows, for instance, for changes in the law or new burdens put upon us by government to be able to come back for those kind of things. But our focus remains on driving up quality standards and driving down costs.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Just before I invite members to comment and ask further questions, could I just invite Jean Lineker in from the waiting room to address the meeting for 3 minutes?
Okay, I'll just admit her now, Chair. Mrs. Lineker, are you with us?
It does look like she's in and not in the waiting room, but yeah. Jean, are you there? Sounds like a seance.
Chairman, I think Mrs. Lineker is muted at the moment. Possibly.
That's not indicated, Chair.
No.
No, there's no.
Just there's no camera. It doesn't say muted.
Right.
Do you want me to proceed with questions while we wait for her to be admitted?
I think she is in, Chair. She's certainly not still shown in the waiting room. Whether she's having any technical difficulties, it's a possibility. It's difficult to it's difficult to confirm that and to help to solve them. And if she can't give us an indication of the difficulty, she seems to have no camera, but I don't see why she shouldn't have sound.
No. If we're happy to proceed with the members' comments, and if this is resolved, then bring her in. Can I do that?
I think that would be appropriate, Chair.
I mean, I don't know if anyone's in your department could give her a call, see what the situation is. So while we're waiting for Jean to come in and make her comments, if you're all happy, I'll proceed with your comments and questions, and we'll bring her in as and when. So could I invite comments and questions from members of Overview and Scrutiny, please? Councillor Hakewell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just and thank you for the outline. It's certainly good for Scrutiny to have so many people who are so well informed on the arrival of the trust. Years of experience on councils. Slide 17, there's 1 or 2 questions, but I'm happy to defer if others are stepping in. Slide 17.1, Chairman, says where there's been an increase in the demand for services and or additional cost, that could not reasonably have been anticipated. Years of being on councils, what's reasonable and what's not and anticipatable, that is perhaps by design very vague, but as beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so is reasonableness. How will could not reasonably have been anticipated be judged, and by whom? Because this is effectively bringing money from NCC. And the second point, probably for Barry on that one, is let's assume that the trust needs £5 million and the NCC budget is set, the unitaries are set. How does that additional funding, where does it come from, given the history of NCC and the districts? So number 1, reasonable. Number 2, where would the money be drawn from should it be requested? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Within the contract figures that we've done, Chair, there is an estimate for demographic growth, which is based upon previous years. So we think that's a reasonable estimate of what is its growth in that area, again, based on previous experience. Probably the biggest unknown at the moment is COVID-19. And as we've set out in the slides, there is a chunk of funding set aside just in case that COVID-19 does become an escalating issue as further lockdowns are put in place. I think in terms of what could we not have reasonably foreseen, if I use my experience of when I was Director of Finance in a London borough and baby P became an issue and a lot of risk boundaries dropped within councils and care costs rose as a result, then nobody could have reasonably foreseen that that was going to be an issue, and a lot of money had to be put into children's social care as a result. So it's those big factors that happen in the external environment that we would say as could not have been reasonably foreseen, rather than smaller issues which we can manage around the change control mechanism. I think inevitably, if there was a large-scale funding request that was required as a result of one of those big external factors, then if we couldn't meet from contingencies or reserves, then we would have to look at readjusting the budget and looking for savings elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. I think, Jim, do you want to come back?
Just very quickly, I certainly understand the issue of something like baby P, but the whole history of NCC has been budgets which overran. I also understand making savings, but at the end of the day, history also shows that those savings are in many of the things that people value. But the question I did ask was, in whose opinion? How do you actually come to a conclusion, for example, that the Trust wants to bring a bill to the county or the unitaries? Who decides that that is a legitimate ask and fulfills, from wherever you can find it, the funding for it? That was my key question. It's this point of reasonableness. Thank you.
Within the governance procedures, Chair, there are several points of escalation. If it can't be agreed immediately, then it would be escalated to both operational and strategic groups to consider. So at the very top end, there will be member and board involvement in doing that. I would say in terms of, I understand the councillor's reference to history, but I would point out that in the current year, the council's underspending by 3 million and the children's service is underspending by over 1 million as well.
Okay, thank you, Barry. I've got Councillor Stamborough.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I've got a number of questions. No doubt you'll stop me when you think I've gone on too long. I'll try and ask them one at a time if I can, because the answers may inform whether other questions are asked. So first one, slide 7, 4 fundamental schedules, one of which is described as financial mechanism, which sets out the management of financial arrangements. And then you've got the 2 schematics at 8 and 9. So what I'm assuming will happen is that there are officers of the council with regards to financial matters will monitor expenditure and hold the trust to account regarding that expenditure. Is there a specific forum either on 8 or 9 where that will happen, or is that something that's intended to happen across all of the governance arrangements and the various groups and boards that are in place?
I think, Chair, I would make a nuance on that, in that the council will not be monitoring the trust's expenditure because the trust has operational independence. So the trust will be providing financial information to the council on a regular basis, which will form part of that intelligent client function and be dealt with through the operational group. So we would expect that the financial information would be reported to the board and then to the council once it's been agreed by the trust.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Well, I understand that, yes. So perhaps I picked my words not very carefully, but effectively what will happen is therefore the trust is going to provide some financial information to the council, which the council may look at and decide is in line with what it expects or is not in line with what it expects. So what I'm wondering is, if that information was not in line with what the council expected, would it then be talking to the trustees asking why or challenging in any way? And if so, at what forum might that happen?
The trust information would, as you would expect, form part of the council's revenue reporting, so it would be incorporated in the revenue reporting. It would be monitored, as I said, through the intelligent client function, through the narrative on clienting the contract, and there are various rectification procedures within the contract as well if the trust starts to overspend.
Okay. Looking at slide 9, it talks about on the council side a quarterly report to the cabinet. If the council is producing monthly finance reports, does that mean that the finance information will come through to the council on a quarterly basis, or will there be information on a monthly basis that will be incorporated into the monthly finance report and then a further quarterly report?
The quarterly information, Chair, would be part of a broader performance management framework update to Cabinet on the overall operation of the Trust. I would expect that the monthly financial information that is reported to the board or internally would form part of the Council's monthly revenue monitoring procedures as well, on information that's passed to the Council by the Trust.
Chris, just on this point, because this is quite operational as opposed to the budget going into the Trust. But as a matter of interest to people that are interested in that side, is that the shadow scrutiny in the North will be having a presentation on the Trust as to what the key roles and responsibilities of members will be in the unitary. So if anyone's interested, that'd be a really good one to come into that meeting and have a listen in. If we can focus on the budget.
Absolutely. And what I was trying to do was attempt to establish where monitoring will be occurring within the county council as regards spending, because if there's more spend than the council has resources for, council has a problem. In the cabinet report, at paragraph 6.68 recently, there's a paragraph which reads, in exceptional circumstances, it is proposed the Trust is able to request additional funding during the financial year for unforeseen additional expenditure as a result of an increase in demand for services and/or investor save business case, and the detail of these circumstances will be set out in the financial mechanism. I'm assuming the detail of these circumstances refers to the phrase in exceptional circumstances. So I'm trying to establish here, what are the circumstances that are deemed to be exceptional under which the council will be asked effectively to put forward to stump up extra money, and apparently the detail of those circumstances is set out in the financial mechanism. Are we able to hear what exactly are deemed as exceptional circumstances, please?
I think, Chair, it's similar to the conversation we've just had with Councillor Higwell, in that it's unforeseen and exceptional circumstances by the very nature are unforeseen. So I try to give a few examples of what would be exceptional there. I'm not quite sure what I could add over and above that. Yeah,
I think that was picked up in Jim's question, whether there's anything in terms of the operations within the Trust that would count as exceptional circumstances. I don't know.
Okay, just that the report to Cabinet says the detail of these circumstances will be set out in the financial mechanism. So I'd assume that they might be written down somewhere, but no, if they're not, I'll move on, not to worry. So next one I've got is, pardon me, while I find my place, Chair. In fact, I don't have the next one. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Could I call in Councillor Mercer, please? Jill?
Thank you very much, Chair. On slide 16, there's a line saying set-up costs funded by DFE, which I note is 0. I had thought that at one time we got an indication that the DFE might pay for some setup costs, and I just wondered if that's definitely not going to happen now. So that was my first question, and the second one was that it's a bit difficult to see how ongoing the split between North and West and how that's going to be organised. Presumably, it's just down to, is it negotiation with each of the unitaries, or is there a percentage increase that's going to be so much for inflation, etc.? So those are two sort of financial. The only other one I've got is that really I can't quite understand this ICF, the intelligent client function. I don't quite see what that is. Is it a board, and how that fits in with the other later slides on 8 and 9 with strategic group, operational group, etc. Somebody could perhaps clarify that.
In terms of the one-off expenditure on that slide, Chair, is, and I should probably have taken that set of costs from DFE out because it's zero. Obviously, we're talking about post trust go live and that the trust has been set up, and I know DFE colleagues are listening into this conversation, and they have provided significant funding into the setup of the trust, and we thank them very much for doing so. So this is post setup where it's ongoing costs, and it's like I say, in retrospect, I should have taken that line out. But again, DFE have provided significant additional funding to the council to set a trust up. In terms of the unitaries, the budgets for the unitaries will be disaggregated as part of the budget process that is currently underway, and task and finish groups have already looked at disaggregation. So that contract price will be split between the two unitaries based upon those principles. There is something called the inter-authority agreement that needs to be developed as part of the transition period, which will set out the governance and the procedures between the two new councils as to how they operate that split contract going forward. But that needs to be developed further as part of that transitional period. I must admit, I'm not the world's biggest expert on ICF, so I might be giving Sarah a hospital pass here, but Sarah, could you cover off the ICF function, please?
That's fine, Barry. Yes, the ICF commission function, simply put, it's those functions that help to manage the contract to ensure that both the council and the trust are being contract compliant, following what's set out in the contract, and particularly having a close grip on performance management. And it is typically a person or a couple of people working together. They might well combine different skills such as procurement, commissioning. The ICF function will also need some input from finance at certain parts of the year, and possibly also need some input from legal services again at some parts of the year, particularly related to the contract sum setting process and any annual reviews. On the schematics on pages 8 to 9, the ICF will report into the operational group, so they will be providing a monthly and quarterly report to the relevant group, to the chair, that will kind of set out what's been done, areas of concern, any issues around and concerns about compliance. So in summary, it's a function of a number of different people working as a team, and they report into the operational and the strategic groups.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Are you coming back on that, or are you happy?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair, and I will bide your words on not looking at the past or talking about that. I have a question about page 10, the rectification plan. I'm assuming there is no financial penalties for any failures, because that would defeat the point of us trying to get better. But where it says consistent failure, and I'm sure it won't happen, Sarah, but it has happened in other children's services, unfortunately, and trusts. If something does have to come back to the unitaries, how do we ensure that the finances to cover that comes back? Because the unitaries won't have budgeted for that.
If I can answer that, Chair, if there are no financial penalties for system failure, because that would just be taking money out of the system and making things worse. I think whilst we're under intervention, there is no prospect of the services coming back to the unitaries, and I think it's a moot point really, in that until we know when we'd be out of intervention, we couldn't even make that decision.
Okay, Councillor McGee, are you happy with that?
I understand it, Chair. I wouldn't say I was happy with it, but I understand it.
Okay, you accept the answer? Yeah. Okay, we'll leave that then. I could call back in Councillor Hakewell.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate no one else was asking a question at that point. We talk of significant money coming from DFE. Are those one-off costs, or will they recur? And again, experience says that sometimes a grant as a one-off cost, when it recurs, it falls upon the trust, and thereby definition on the 2 unitaries if they're not one-off costs in that way. And my second question is, what is the equivalent of the ICF in the traditional, as it stands at the moment, NCC? Who does what the ICF does at NCC, albeit that ICF is within the trust? So DFE costs, and I did notice on slide 16, there's a DFE grant of 1.5 million. Not sure if that's what Barry is talking about. So those would be my 2 questions, one-off or recurring. ICF, who does that now as an equivalent to what will happen in the future in that financial realm?
Thank you.
I think, Chair, I can guarantee that the DFE funded one-off costs will not produce any ongoing financial liability into the trust. The DFE have funded a one-off cost for the setting up of the trust, and they will not be ongoing as the trust moves forward. In terms of the client function, because there is no contractor, there isn't any client function within the council that carries out an equivalent function at the moment. The nearest I could say to it would be the improvement board that currently monitors children's improvement, would be the nearest equivalent that we've got at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Stamborough.
Thank you, Chair. So thinking in terms of whether the proposed contract sum is well founded and will support achieving the purpose of the trust. Clive said at the start of this that that the trust was satisfied, or maybe paraphrasing, satisfied with the resources that are being transferred over, and that they're sufficient to cover the scope of the contract. And also went on to say something which was really welcome, that the trust is there to improve the quality of services and drive down costs, which is, I think, a good twin aim there. On slide 13, there's a reference to the number of agency staff and their salaries, or not the number of, but the fact that there are agency staff who are going to, at some point, be working for the trust. Is there an intention to, as part of the driving down of costs, to reduce the agency staff? Because you know, I can see that if there was a point where the trust did require more money to do the things we want to do and to improve quality, the county council isn't overloaded with spare cash, and obviously one way to find extra money is to drive down costs. So would that particular item be a route by which that might happen?
I think both the trust and the council would have an aspiration to reduce the number of agency staff, and there are business rates pilot funded programs to achieve that effect. It's always more efficient and economical to have permanently employed staff, because agency does come with an overhead. Unless Clive wants to say otherwise, I think we would both share that ambition.
I'd share your ambition, Barry, and just to say that, you know, there always will be a number of interim agency staff. We aim to keep that as low as we possibly can. It's not good value for money for the public purse, and our aim is to convert as many people to permanent contracts as possible.
Okay, thank you. Chris, are you wanting to come back in? No. Right, I have no more hands up.
Chair, I think we're in a position to make a second attempt with admitting Mrs. Lineker to the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Might be an appropriate point now. So
okay, yeah, I've got a couple more speakers, but let's get Jean in first, and then I'll pick the other speakers.
Okay, I'll admit her now.
Jean?
Hello, Mrs. Lineker. Can you hear us at all?
Oh, there she is.
Oh, excellent.
Hi, Jean. Can you hear us?
Mrs. Lineker, I think you still have your microphone switched off. Mrs. Lineker, can you hear us? You don't seem to have, you're not showing us having a microphone connected, which means we can't hear you.
We've lost her.
No, she switched off her camera.
James, could I suggest, clearly having a lot of problems, is that somebody contacts us, you could maybe telephone in. I know she's done that at previous meetings.
Okay.
I'll just bring back in Jill Mercer, then Councillor Hakewell.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 12, there's a mention of schools as agreed by Schools Forum. And as as the trustees not covering education, I wondered what that reference was for. And the other thing I just wondered is on side 14, which is the additional costs of the trust, have we got any idea how that compares with other trusts? We're talking about 0.9 million, which is a lot of money, and obviously was not something that was needed under the current system. And I don't know how that compares with anywhere else, if you've got any idea on that, please.
Certainly, Chair, I can try and answer those questions. Children's Services obviously covers off both social care and education, and there is close linkages between the two. And it is the case that a dedicated schools grant funds some of those, not a huge amount, but some of those services within social care. That can only happen if the Schools Forum agree to it, and hence the reference to Schools Forum, because if dedicated schools grant is used to fund social care costs to a small extent, then Schools Forum have to agree that statutorily. I have worked in another council that has set up a children's trust, and I would say that in terms of the additional costs that the councils put in, that benchmarks reasonably well with what other councils of a similar size have had to put in as well.
Thank you. If Councillor, Jim, I'm going to bring in Councillor Roy first because it's her first time participating. Then I'll bring you and Jane. So can I leave you till the end, Jim? Councillor Hakewell? I'm bringing Councillor Roy in.
Sorry, yes, I was putting thumbs up, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow on from Councillor Stanborough's line of inquiry in relation to agency staff. Obviously, this has been an issue that has increased the Children's Services budget spending for a number of years, as long as I have been a councillor. And every single Ofsted report, every single serious, every single report that we have in relation to Children's Services draws attention to the inability to recruit and retain staff and the overdependence on agency staff. And it's all very well having the aspiration, but I would like to just inquire as to having had that aspiration, what strategies were in place to actually make sure that we have a less dependency on agency staff, and particularly whether there had been any kind of investigation into on ground from day one, putting us back on national terms and conditions for the Children's Services Trust staff.
I think all I would say to that, Councillor, is that there are, as I said, projects in place funded by business rates pilots to reduce agency staff, and that is within the contract price in terms of a savings target. I think the question about terms and conditions is probably outside the scope of this discussion.
Could I come back, Chair?
Yeah.
So when I first became a councillor, I was advised there was a piece of work undertaken by the then Overview and Scrutiny, a working group in relation to reducing the use of agency staff. This was a councillor-led working group which was cross-party, and I understand came out with a series of very good recommendations. Can I ask whether any of those have been considered?
Could I just say, as passionate as I am about this subject, Councillor Roy, it is out of the scope of this discussion. However, when we talk about this afterwards, I think there's some pertinent questions we could ask. I think if I could just do just redirect that back to budget and ask Clive, are you confident that within the financial envelope that you've been given, that you can address the issue of recruitment and retention, which remains as we move into the trust?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am confident. The Council have already done a significant amount of work, and we've already seen the percentage of staff that are covered by agency positions fall to around the 15% level now, which is at historic lows of where it's been. So we're confident that we have then the ability to drive forward that change, and we've accepted that savings target and the resources to deliver that. I'm
just going to come back on this one, because I see the agency figures are 138, which is 132 social workers, which isn't 15% of the social workforce, but we'll have to read out those questions outside this meeting, but I don't see the 50% figure, I see 132. However, I will, Councillor Roy, do you have any more follow-up on that?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Chair. This is slightly outside the remit of the Children's Trust budget, but I think it is absolutely elemental to the functioning of the service. And it is about the remaining educational statutory services that will remain with the Council and later on the unitary authorities. The budget for the Trust looks to be in excess of the existing Children's Services budget. What is left behind with the Council and later the unitary? Do we have some figures for that? Because if that does not function well, if that is not properly funded, the partnership that is actually essential between the educational side and the Children's Trust social services, if that partnership does not work like clockwork, the children that we are there to provide the services for will not actually get the joined up service that we require. This is about a budget, but it's also about delivering a service that is fit for purpose for the children who most need it. So it's that joined up partnership work, which I think is essential to the safety of the children. And if the educational side that sits with the Council still isn't funded in the way that it should be from the budget that we have available, how will that smooth partnership working be assured? That's the question that I'd like to know. Are those children going to be properly managed between the two services? Thank you.
Barry, I'll bring you in on that. I'm not sure we have the right people here to answer that question, because the people here are specifically on the budget of the trust, but I'm not going to assume. Barry, do you have anything to comment on that?
I could only say one thing, which is an assurance that those budgets which are outside the scope of the trust contract price in relation to other children's services have not been altered or reduced as a result of this exercise.
Okay. Thank you. Right, so I've got Councillor Hayquell, then Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just trying to understand the budgetary aspect, and I couldn't be at any meeting for the last 6 months without making the point that whenever anyone mentions task and finish panels in the north, they're all held in secret. There are no agendas, there are no minutes, there is no ability for us to even watch. And I have to make that particular point. So when everyone mentions it, I'm blank on what goes on there and only get what we might get to scrutiny in the north. But when you look at the budget that will be set by the shadow between the two unitaries, what will the criteria be financially based on the services which will be disparate between the north and the west? How will that be worked out? And by the same method in terms of any additional funding, for example, if one unitary identifies, or through the work of the trust, one half of the two unitaries has a demand but the other doesn't, I'm just recognising that all of that falls on every taxpayer through council tax to either find or find savings. So I hope I've made that point reasonably well, that there could be a disparate demand from one or the other unitary, or from the trust to one or the other unitaries. How does that work out, and devising what level as it stands at the moment at the county is north and west in terms of finance? Thank you.
I think, as I said before, Chair, the existing budget will be split based upon the disaggregation principles agreed as part of the disaggregation of the county council. In terms of how that resource is then managed going forward, that's got to be part of that inter-authority agreement that I mentioned that will be developed as part of the transition phase. And it is the case, Councillor, that there may be different demand levels in different areas. There may also be different requirements from each council around the edges of different priorities, but that's got to be done as part of an inter-authority agreement between the two councils as we move forward from 1st November to 31st of March.
Very quick comeback. The disaggregation principles outside of today, could I be pointed to the disaggregation principles for disaggregating the budget for the trust going into the two unitaries, please?
I think
certainly do that, yeah.
I think we can pick that up in our discussion afterwards as something as the extra information we'd like to request, Jim.
Okay, thank you.
I've got Councillor Mercer. Are you still wanting to come in?
Sorry, that was left up from before. Okay,
so I'll say again, James, I'm aware that we haven't had Jean into the meeting. Has she managed to dial in?
Through you, Chairman, I've spoken to her again. I think she's got technical issues that we're not going to be able to overcome. So what she has agreed is that she will send in the points she wanted to make in writing, and I will circulate those to the committee members and to the relevant officers. Okay, thank you, James. I have spoken to Jean, so I'm sure that will be fine. So I have no more hands raised on this discussion. So thank you to the officers for attending. Thank you for answering the questions. I think we kept it as close to agenda, probably better than we normally do. Sometimes I don't know, but anyway, thank you very much. We will now have a discussion as a committee of what we want to put forward to the executive. I just want to for us to bear in mind that the trust is going live on the 1st of November. The Cabinet have agreed to delegate authority to the Chief Executive, the Leader of the Council and the Cabinet member to take action on behalf of NCC. And the next Cabinet meeting isn't until the 10th of November.
So if we want to put any views, thoughts, recommendations forward, they will go forward from today direct to the Chief Executive and the lead member. But to the officers, thank you very much for your time. We'll now have a discussion as a committee of what we want to take forward. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, just a couple of points on your last comments. This is of course a public meeting, so anyone who wishes to attend, wishes to remain, can. There might also be points arising as the committee proceeds through its discussion of any conclusions where some further input from the experts would be useful.
Okay, sorry, I was going to let you leave, but I can't let you leave. So you have to stay. I was being nice.
Thank you for trying.
So if we want to, have we identified any comments or recommendations that we want to put forward to the Chief Executive, the lead member and the leader? Based on the questions, Chris, Councillor Stanborough?
I'm happy to have a first go at that, Chair.
Yeah.
And coming back to the phrase I used earlier, which was whether the proposed contract sum is well founded and will support achieving the purpose of the trust. From what Clive Heafy says, and I don't doubt him for a moment, it is, because he's told us that from the trust point of view, they're happy with the resources being transferred and that they cover the scope of the contract. So we can only conclude that the negotiations have managed to achieve that. I suppose the worry for me, and it may be outside the scope, is whether in whatever circumstances they are, further sums of money are required because something exceptional has happened that we couldn't foresee, is whether the county council or its successors will have the resources to be able to meet those requirements. And that's the concern, and that's the big risk. And of course, we'll only know that when the time comes. We must all hope, I suppose, that in the meantime, the trust is successful in driving down costs, and that therefore exceptional, unforeseen circumstances can be met from within the resources that are already available to them. I think that's how I see it at the moment, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hakewell.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, the leader, well, he was there. I saw his face a minute ago. He's still there. The leader has listened to all of this, so I would expect by default that all the things that we've said will be on the minds of the executive and the leader, and clearly they can watch this video again. So I'm not so sure how much we can actually phrase as a result of this conversation that will not be on the record here or in the minds of the leader. And I think the deputy leader, Councillor Bowen, appears to be there as well. My only question is, will the trust start in the format that we've all been promised on November the 1st?
I think that could that question be answered now by one of our officers?
I certainly see no reason why not.
I agree. I see no reason why not.
There's no reason this trust won't go live on the Monday, the 2nd of November, subject to ministerial approval.
Hold on, Chairman. Subject to ministerial approval. That's a caveat in the current environment.
And so that's the process of governance that any trust will need to go through. So both the two parties to the contract, that is the trust and the council, will need to agree, and that all is then submitted to the DFE, and civil servants have been working with ministers to make sure they're well briefed. Again, we are not expecting any problems, but everything would have to be subject to ministerial approval, but nothing which I understand should concern to date.
Sorry, Chairman. If it doesn't, and we know that, you know, over the past it hasn't, what actually was Plan B then? If, for example, whatever happens in government, and my goodness, government has enough on its plate. I'm sorry, whenever anyone puts a caveat on something subject to something else, what is plan B then if, for example, parliamentary time runs out or you know, I just felt that that would be a clear journey with dates and meetings that triggered the start on November the 1st. Thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back. But I think that's massive because I don't want to be on the 2nd of November wondering whether NCC or the Trust are in charge of looking after the care of our children.
I'm not sure if anyone.
Should I come back?
Sorry, Sarah, did you want to speak?
Should I come back? I was just going to reiterate that the briefings we've had so far don't indicate any concerns, but it would be right for me to say that there are 3 steps to the process of approval.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Could I also add that the Trust Board considered all the documentation yesterday, the legal documentation, the contract price, the initial business plan, and the Trust Board is satisfied that on that basis it's happy to go live. So that's one of the second of the third strand. So that all happened yesterday, and the Trust are content.
Okay, thank you. Just want to take this opportunity just to push. Sorry, John, I'm just going to come in as chair on this, just to push forward on a question that kind of comes on from what Councillor Roy said. We're talking about the exceptional circumstances asking for money. So my question would be around, what if those exceptional circumstances came from within the service and weren't an external factor? So that it's not suddenly 10 high placement costs, but we have got 136 agency staff, 132 of which are social workers as of August, going into the trust, which I don't understand the 15% figure, because that is not 15% of the social worker force, it's more like 45%. To address that is understanding if the trust is happy that they have the resource within the financial envelope that we've given them to address that issue of 45% agency staff. And just to, because that's an exceptional circumstance that isn't outside the control, it is already within there, and it will have to be addressed out of the financial envelope that you have. So that could be answered now. It could be a question that we pose for.
Could I perhaps frame it slightly differently, Chair?
Yeah,
those agency social workers are there now.
mm-hmm.
And the current directorate is underspending by over £1 million. So clearly there is enough resource in the system to pay for those agency staff because the directorate is not overspending. And that budget will be passported over to the trust, because I personally, as Section 151 officer, do not think that there is a financial risk due to the current level of agency staff in the directorate that will be passported over to the trust.
Okay, so that's a question I will take outside this meeting, because even though we can support it, it's not a position we want to be in because of service delivery and what's best for the children, but that is not a budget question, so I will defer that. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, coming back to this, having to get the agreement of the DFE, I'm slightly puzzled at the timing. We're only 12 days away from go live. I'm just wondering what when that will be passed to the DFE and when you expect a reply back, because it's cutting a bit fine now. And as for changing circumstances, extra pressures, it was mentioned about terms and conditions. If suddenly there was a national change to terms and conditions which was outside our control, that would presumably be an exceptional circumstance.
If I could just say, the DFE question, I think, is something that would have to be directed to the Chief Executive of NCC. The second part of that question, does anybody want to pick that up?
Yeah, it's Lauren Coxon here from the DFE. Hi. I don't know if it's helpful if I try and kind of manage the DFE question. The councillor's raised a good point that it's very soon to go live, and we have all the documentation that all of the schedules, the service delivery contract, governance side agreement, contract sum and business plan, all from the council and the trust now. So they've sent us over everything, and we're sending that up to the minister today. So we are trying to kind of expedite this as quickly as possible so that there aren't any hold-ups there. We are anticipating questions from the Minister as well, which we're trying to manage as quickly as possible. So we're trying to do everything we can to ensure that this happens as quickly as possible so that the Secretary of State can sign and seal the trust next week so that it can go live for the 2nd of November.
Okay, thank you for that, Lauren. And the second part of Jill's comment?
Yeah, I'll cover that one, Chair.
Circumstances, yeah.
So in terms of, I think the Councillor is referring to a national change. So in terms of changes in law, there are mechanisms within the contracts to cover off new burdens or changes in law. And if that came with additional funding, then obviously there's a discussion about the level to which the Trust and the Council respond to that change in law. Terms and conditions wouldn't be part of that because I think Councillor Roy's already referred to the fact that we sit outside of national terms and conditions. And locally negotiated pay is included within the contract price.
Okay, thank you. James, do you want to say anything at this point? That's James Edmonds, not Hakewell.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I suppose what I would attempt to take from the discussion about conclusions so far is that the committee has taken some reassurance from what it's heard from the Trust Chief Executive that the contract sum is sufficient. I think if there is a caveat, a risk that the committee would wish to highlight in relation to that at this point, it is around around the issue of unexpected circumstances, and the parties shouldn't readily find themselves in a situation where unexpected circumstances do arise and they put a financial pressure on the trust and therefore by extension on the contracting authority that's over and above the budget allocation.
Okay, so that leads me to say, did the committee agree to delegate authority to the vice chairs, the chair and the vice chairs, to approve the final document that James will put forward, setting out our comments and recommendations? Are you happy to delegate that to us?
Aye.
So
general consensus there?
So just to be clear, Chair, so we're talking about a letter essentially going directly from the committee to the Chief Executive, the leader, the portfolio holder, as you named earlier, setting out the conclusions from today's meeting, which were broadly, as I just summarised. So the committee takes some reassurance from what it's heard about the position going into the creation of the trust, but also highlights as a risk to be avoided the point around unforeseen circumstances leading to additional costs beyond the starting financial envelope.
Yep, I'm in agreement with that. I think I'm getting general consensus from the committee from what I can see. Okay, so thank you very much. If we end that item now, am I allowed to let people go now? They can stay. Obviously, you're always welcome to stay, but I know that you're very busy. You've got a deadline to meet.
Councillor McGee has his hand up, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair. Can we just remember that we did ask about the information on the desegregation principles, which will give us a better understanding going into the future?
Yes, I think we're saying that that's a slightly separate item to the budget, but these are questions that can be directed to the Chief Executive and the lead member and the portfolio holder.
So through you, Chair, there was a specific request if Councillor Hakewell asked for it, but I assume that other members would also wish to have it, if they could be directed to the disaggregation principles that were referred to during the course of discussion. Councillor Hakewill asked if they were available, and unless I'm very much mistaken, the Chief Finance Officer indicated that they could be provided.
That's correct.
Yep, thank you, James, Chair.
John, are you happy with that? Well, happy-ish. Yeah. Okay. I'll try again to let you go if you want to, but no, thank you very much. We do appreciate that you're busy. We do appreciate you've got a deadline, and thank you for your time and trying to take the questions as well as you could. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, thank you, members.
If we move on to item 7, which is the work programme and responses to previous resolutions. Crikey, I really sound like a member of the Labour Party now. If I could invite James to present this report.
Thank you, Chair. So it's the standard report that comes to each meeting of the committee to give you an overview of the work programme, with a view to the committee amending, adding, taking out anything from that it sees necessary to reflect its remit and to focus its effort as much as possible on the right areas. And then at the appendix, the note of responses to previous resolutions. So it's only 3 weeks rather than the standard 4 since the last meeting of the committee, so, because this meeting was brought forward. So there's that's reflected in the report in some ways. I think I'll highlight a couple of points. So on the work programme, page 18, actually both of the points relate to the work programme. So firstly, there was a brief discussion at the last pre-meeting about whether there would be any arrangements for the committee to hand over to its successors at the new unitary authorities. There's a suggestion made at the same pre-meeting that might be something that the committee as a whole would be worthwhile for it to discuss, and there would be a logic in doing that at its final meeting, which is on the 27th of January 2021. So that item has been added there, and then picking up both on the work programme and responses to previous resolutions. The committee has now received a written briefing on action taken in response to the previous Highway Services Contract Scrutiny Review. The committee was going to use that briefing to decide whether the information provided in the briefing resolved that matter, or whether it saw any need to have an item on the response to the scrutiny review as a formal item of business at a future scrutiny committee meeting. So that briefing has now been provided, so the committee is in a position to reach a conclusion on whether or not it does anything it needs to do anything further on that matter. Otherwise, Chairman, as I say, it's the standard report. I hope it's self-explanatory, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions on the report? Or any comments? I'm happy to take comments. Councillor Stanborough.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, just a couple of comments. So our next meeting is on the 25th of November, and then we've got one on the 27th of January. So given that we'll have a pre-meet for the 25th of November meeting, I think on Wednesday the 4th of November, we can probably firm up on agenda items then, although I suspect we might want to look at the finances of the county council. There's a report coming to cabinet June on the 10th of November, so we might want to have a look at that. And James's reminder is a handy one, that we should reach a conclusion amongst ourselves as to whether we want to do anything further on the highways thing, and again we can cover that off on the 4th of November, I hope.
Yeah, I think that a discussion on that is probably more appropriate at a pre-meeting. Do I have any further comments?
Yes, please.
Oh, Malcolm.
Can I come in, Chair?
Malcolm.
Okay.
I'm going to come round and give you a lesson in how to use the blue hand. I am. But anyway, off you go.
Thank you. one thing that does concern me at this stage is this question of the changeover between us and the next authority. I'm a bit concerned that we have a great team here at the moment, and there's more members from the north on our committee than there is from the west. But the people from the north, who are they going to be? The shadow people? Well, there's people on that shadow committee are not even going to stand at the next election. So therefore, what's the point of having them on the changeover situation where they will understand nothing? It's ridiculous. It really needs to be looked at very carefully of how we're going to do this, because the scrutiny committee is so important and will be important to the next councils. So I suggest that we somehow trying to get around this situation in a more sober way. I look forward to your comments, Madam Chairman.
I think that commenting on whether it's out of our control who's going to be standing and also who will actually get elected. So we can't know exactly who's going to be there. We would just have to do the best we can. If you were leaving employment and you're a responsible employee, you would do a robust and professional handover. And that's what we have to work to. Even those of us who are hoping to stand might not get elected. We might get our butt whipped by independents or somebody, you never know. But I'm afraid we have to work with what we've got and hopefully respect the fact that our members will behave professionally in that handover. Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Chair. On that matter, all these scrutiny meetings are actually on YouTube. I think that's a very good training tool for anybody who is wanting to be elected, who wants to get involved in overview and scrutiny. And these meetings will be there for forever. So if there are people who are wanting to be elected, are interested in overview and scrutiny, I think it's the duty of the each group leader to point the potential candidates in that direction and think about training as a very serious issue for every for every member that's going to be there, and certainly for the group leaders.
Well, that's yeah, it is a very good point. As I always say, I beat that drum. We have a lot of people who claim to be passionate about scrutiny, but then we never see them at scrutiny. So people need to, if they're going to take it seriously, prove that they intend to. But yeah, very good point, Jane. Do I have any other comments? Right, so we're happy to defer some of those conversations to our pre-meet on the 4th of November. And we note the actions taken in response to the previous resolutions. I keep saying revolutions because I'm looking at John McGee.
Have you been reading Cromwell?
It's a Freudian slip.
I'll get you a red flag.
I might have a secret one, you never know. So we're happy with the actions that have been taken.
Agreed.
Yeah. Is that all right, James?
Yes.
That's fine, Chair.
That okay. No urgent business has been raised, has it?
No.
So the pre-meeting is on the 4th of November and the next full committee meeting is on the 25th of November. And thank you, everybody.